Good afternoon, and welcome to the National Press Club. My name is Monroe Carmen. I'm president of the club and editor-at-large at Bloomberg Business News. I'd like to welcome club members and their guests in the audience, as well as those watching on C-SPAN or listening to this program on National Public Radio or the Global Internet Computer Network. Before introducing our head table, I'd like to remind our members of some upcoming speakers. On Thursday, September 7th, that's tomorrow, Secretary of Education Richard Riley will be here to talk about the state of education in America. On Tuesday, September 12th, John Deutsch, the director of the CIA, will address the club. And on Friday, September 22nd, General Paul Tibbets, pilot of the Enola Gay, which dropped the bomb on Hiroshima, will talk about the 50th anniversary of the end of World War II. Transcripts and audio and videotapes of Press Club luncheons are available by calling 1-800-NPC-2334, 1-800-NPC-2334. If you have any questions for our speaker, please write them on the cards provided at the table. Pass them up to me, and I'll ask as many as time permits. And now I would like to introduce the head table and ask them to stand briefly when their names are called. From your right, Mike Clements, USA Today. Brian Grewley, Detroit News. John Linker, Scripps Howard Newspapers and WTOP Radio in Washington. Frank Ockefer, Milwaukee Journal Sentinel and past president of the National Press Club. William Day, Director, Washington Communications, Ford Motor Company. Laurie Montgomery, Detroit Free Press. Sorry. Just skipped a name there, excuse me. Mrs. Valerie Trotman, spouse of our speaker. Skipping over our speaker for the moment, Dick Ryan, Detroit News, and member of the Speakers Committee who arranged today's luncheon. Elliot Hall, Vice President, Washington Affairs, Ford Motor Company. Jackie Thomas, Washington Bureau Chief, Detroit News. Phil Frame, Auto News. Keith Rockwell, the Journal of Commerce. Kathy O'Brien, the Associated Press. We are privileged to have as our guest today a distinguished student of the literature of William Shakespeare. Alex Trotman not only likes to read the Bard of Avon, he likes to quote him frequently. Let us hope that his speech today is not much ado about nothing. When Mr. Trotman isn't quoting Shakespeare, he likes to tinker with automobiles. Last year, Michael Moore, the producer of the acclaimed movie Roger and Me, challenged Mr. Trotman to show a national television audience that he knows something about the workings of an automobile. He asked Mr. Trotman to change the oil on a Ford car. As the cameras rolled, Mr. Trotman crawled underneath the vehicle and completed the task. He said, "I'd love to do this for all our customers." So, if any of you need an oil change, our guest will be available after today's luncheon. When he's not quoting Shakespeare or draining oil, Mr. Trotman occupies himself by running the world's second largest automobile company, the Ford Motor Company. The fact that Ford is number 2 rankles the chairman. His goal is to make Ford number 1. As he likes to say, quote, "Have you ever seen a team run out on the field and say, 'We want to be number 2'? No." And Alex Trotman certainly has the credentials to achieve his objective. After serving as a flying officer in the Royal Air Force, he joined Ford of Britain in 1955 as a student trainee. He worked his way up the corporate ladder in Europe and Australia and North America before becoming Ford's 6th chairman in 1993. He is the first Ford chief executive, not born in the United States. He was born 62 years ago in Middlesex, England. He was educated in Scotland and became an American citizen in the 1970s. Not big on perks, Mr. Trotman abolished the executive dining room at Ford's North American headquarters in Dearborn, Michigan. He also abolished the special blue stationery that Ford executives were accustomed to writing notes on. They now communicate on the same white paper that everyone else uses. But Mr. Trotman's egalitarianism does not extend to the use of Ford-provided automobiles. Because I have a secret to tell you, he suffers from sticker shock. He doesn't own a car himself. He only drives company cars, and he doesn't drain his own oil. The chairman comes to our podium after a recent trip to China. Perhaps he will tell us something about the commercial potential offered by that country. Ladies and gentlemen, to quote Shakespeare again, all's well that ends well. Please welcome to the National Press Club, Alex Trotman.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm honored to be with you this afternoon. I would like to make one small correction to my introduction, a very gracious introduction, thank you. But I do own a car. I own a Mustang Cobra GT, a red one. It's fun. I don't know what your day-to-day routine is like, but if it's anything like mine, people are talking about how fast the world is changing all the time. And it is changing very fast. I don't think most people realize, however, just how fast it's changing and how fast those changes are going to impact our lives personally, the lives of our employees, the lives of our people in our country, the competitiveness of our country, the standard of living of our country. Tremendous amount of change. What I'd like to do this afternoon is to make my point by starting off with a little automotive history, a brief look at the global marketplace as what's happening out there, the implications for business and government, and then I'd like to give you some words of wisdom from yours truly on what I think is going to be needed for all of us to prepare for what's coming down the road. I'm going to focus on these subjects today because I'm convinced that the challenge for all of us in the United States, in North America for that matter, and in Western Europe over the next decade or two will be the new competition coming at us from emerging countries, particularly in the Asia-Pacific region. Their impact on shaping the global economy is enormous. Without major change in what we call the West, in the way we govern and the way we conduct our businesses, without major changes, I think our role in the world is going to diminish. Just a little history, just to set the stage. Believe it or not, the auto industry is in its second century already. The Europeans invented the automobile, but the Americans were the first nation to put themselves on wheels, thanks primarily to Henry Ford, who took the assembly line, made it work, reduced costs, made cars affordable and popular, so everyone had a car. That was fine. Then in the 1920s, General Motors had a fantastic idea. They let people choose the color of their car. They introduced regular new model changes instead of hanging on for years to the same vehicle. And they adopted a strategy of a car for every purse and every purpose, and it worked. And then there was a big consolidation in the industry in North America as a result of what GM did. In Europe, much the same thing happened. It was a cottage industry at one time. It consolidated around several major producers. There were very high tariffs and quotas in Europe, so selling there meant building there. That was about the only option. And Ford and General Motors opened assembly plants in numerous places in Europe and then expanded into Asia Pacific and Latin America. By the 1950s, many of us thought that the United States auto industry was absolutely unassailable, immune from any serious competition. Some of you might remember that the US Justice Department seriously considered breaking up General Motors, at that time headed for about 60% market share in the United States. Non-US companies just didn't have the brand recognition or the dealer network to get established in the United States. When they made a run at it, and some of them did, they didn't have the financial strength to follow through, so they all failed. No one gave any serious thought to the Japanese. We laughed at them. They weren't very good, and they made really low-quality products. Then came the oil shocks in the 1970s, and that turned the whole thing on its head. Most of our assumptions in this country about the European competitors and the Japanese competitors turned out to be wrong. Not totally wrong, but almost. There was an industry consolidation, worldwide industry consolidation between 1950 and 1970. Only 4 of the top 10 manufacturers in the world in 1950 remained in the top 10 in 1970. 6 went out of the top 10. What led to that consolidation? Same forces as are at work today. Technology, efficiency, economy of scale. Only the most competitive could survive. Ford Motor Company was one of the survivors. We remain a global manufacturer today. We do business in approximately 200 countries. We have manufacturing facilities in about 30. It's a capital-intensive business, of course, so when we make an investment, it's for the long term. And we really value the relationships that we've built up in many countries over the last 92 years. Now, next 10 or 20 years, we're going to see further consolidation in the world's auto business. This time it'll be faster. It'll be faster because of the changes that are occurring in technology. That's the primary driver. You can now buy for 20 cents the processing power, computer processing power that cost $1 only 5 years ago. And the cost of that processing power is diminishing year by year, day by day almost. Today's cars are becoming computers on wheels. Some people have called them that. I don't think it's too much of an exaggeration. 20 years ago, there were no electronics at all in automobiles. Today, about 10% of the cost is electronic. It's not too far away. We'll have 20% of the cost electronic. They're really changing very, very quickly. So sophisticated technology is becoming increasingly commonplace. And the movement of capital and information around the world is becoming virtually instantaneous. National identities are becoming blurred. Today's equivalents of products like the Model T and the VW Beetle are identified more with the company that sells them than with the country that makes them, as it was in the old days. That same globality applies to products like Sony Walkman, Coca-Cola, IBM computers, Boeing aircraft, and numerous other products. All of these trends are leading to what many people are thinking of these days as a borderless world. Some people have called this period the beginning of the end of geography. Now, if it is the end of geography, it doesn't mean that differences between markets have evaporated. Of course they haven't. We still have to tailor our cars and trucks for many regions and, in some cases, for individual countries around the world. I think that will continue to be the case. But the course we're on, this changing world, rapidly changing world, the changes are irreversible. They're moving. I think forward-looking companies know what to do. Compete with the very best from anywhere in the world. Compete on technology. Compete on engineering. Drive out the barriers between us in business, the barriers that separate us from our customers, and keep the pressure up always on productivity and quality. Ford Motor Company is forging ahead to compete in this increasingly borderless world. On January the 1st last, we put together our 2 huge organizations in North America and Europe, created one single organization that sees the world as its marketplace. Not North America, not Europe, one single global market. We're not organized around geographic regions anymore. We're organized around products. We don't have separate product lines by region. We're a leaner, faster organization now, and we're becoming very low in what I call the coefficient of bureaucratic drag. Why change? Our horizons are changing. Over 80% of the world's population lives outside what we think of as the mature auto markets of North America, Western Europe, and Japan. As the Asian and South American economies open and grow, we believe that our potential market will expand dramatically over the next 10, 20, 30 years. Over the next 10 years alone, we expect auto sales in the Asia-Pacific region to grow from 12 to 19 million vehicles a year. And in 8 of those countries, if I take Japan as the primary one out of there, we expect sales to double from today's levels in the next 10 years. So as we prepare ourselves to compete in this new automotive world, I've been telling all of the men and women in Ford, repeatedly telling them, not to lose sight of one very important principle. It is an important principle, and that is that companies may have advantages at any point in time in their products, in their technology, in their market share around the world, but none of those advantages should be deemed sustainable. It's important not to think they are. The only sustainable advantage for a company, for any enterprise, is the quality of its people. People come into the enterprise with a work ethic, good or bad, education and training, creativity, determination, durability. It's up to the leaders of those enterprises to provide the tools and the atmosphere for those people to do their very best work, to compete with the best anywhere in the world, and to win. This can and must be sustained. That's the only sustainable competitive advantage. So if we in business are adapting to this rapidly changing, more competitive world, what about the governments? How should they respond? Well, I'm stealing my answer from Peter Drucker, who wrote that governments should be concerned about the climate and they should stop trying to manage the weather. I thank you, Peter, because I think the principle still holds. In our business, in the auto business, we've managed a lot of recessions and a Great Depression and a lot of other travails over the last 90-odd years. And we've also demonstrated that we can take on new competitors. All of that's the weather, if you like. But trade and regulatory policies are set by governments, and these can do us a lot of good or a lot of harm. GATT and the World Trade Organization may be taking us to a zero-tariff world. That's the plan. But what do we do when a country like Korea, which has a closed market, increases its automotive manufacturing capacity to 5 million vehicles, which is what's underway? 3 million vehicles more than they can sell domestically. All of this is going to happen within the next 5 years. Korea could pose a bigger problem for world trade than Japan has in the last 10 or 20 years. Now, Koreans say, well, our import tariffs are lower than they are into Europe. That's true, but there are other mechanisms internally that effectively close the market. Australia, by contrast, has lowered its tariffs substantially, and the Koreans have zapped in and now dominate the small car market in Australia. Now, we've all experienced the disruptions that the Japanese policies have caused and the problems they've had for the West. I don't know, I really don't believe that the West can tolerate more Japans. I think we have to guard against that. This morning I was at a ceremony with Ambassador Cantor and Walter Mondale and Ron Brown and others to commemorate the recent US-Japanese automotive agreement. For the United States, that agreement should mean more exports and more manufacturing jobs in this country. I think just as important, the agreement sends a signal to countries like Korea that the United States can't allow other countries to have totally free access to this marketplace while their home countries are closed to products from this country. Very important message. The potential of the Asia-Pacific region is huge, and anyone who wants to be a major player there has to be involved in China. China needs Western technology. But the West and China, I think we all understand very well, embody different cultures, different histories, different values about many things. We lost one of the great common things that we had when the Soviet Union disintegrated. Thomas Friedman pointed out last month in the New York Times that trade forms the strongest barrier today between the United States and China. If the full potential of China and the West is to be realized, I think we're all going to have a lot of patience. We're going to have to develop a relationship that's built on shared economic and strategic objectives. We in Ford have 4 joint ventures already in China to make components, and 2 weeks ago we announced that we'd bought a major equity position in Jiangling Motors in Nanchong to build vehicles in China. I just came back from my 3rd trip to China 4 or 5 days ago, 3rd trip this year. I'm really, I have to tell you, greatly impressed by the vision of the Chinese leaders that I've met over the last year or two. I'm impressed by the scale and the speed of the huge construction programs that they have underway in China. The airports, the expressways, the harbors, the tools that they're going to need to be a major economic power in the world. I met the mayor of Shanghai last week in the new city hall in Shanghai. A magnificent building. I've never been in a building more magnificent in the West, any place, and it was built from soup to nuts in 18 months. The Chinese move very, very quickly on specific developments, but they take a long-term view of world developments in total, very strategic view. The Chinese Premier, Zhou Enlai, apparently was asked a few years ago to comment on the significance of the French Revolution, and he's reported to have said, "It's too soon to say." It's true in our business that a lot of things are too soon to say and nothing is certain. But this certainly has been an active time over the last year or two for Ford Motor Company in the Asian region. Yesterday we filed an application with the Indian government to build a major assembly facility in that country, starting in 1996. And I'm pleased to announce that just this morning, the government of Vietnam approved our application to build a factory near Hanoi. We're also well along with discussions to establish ourselves as manufacturers in Thailand and in Indonesia. So we're very active. Business growth and trade practices in Asia are one thing, but regulatory policies relating to safety, to emissions, to fuel economy, to financial services in the West, as well as in Asia, also have a very major impact on the flow of goods and services. In the European Union, thanks to the reforms of 1992, they're getting their marketplace together, those 15 countries, into a single marketplace, and they'll be one of the biggest consumer markets in the world. While we can point to developments like these in the European Union, what about the conflicting regulations among the European Union, NAFTA, or the United States for that matter, and Japan? If regulations could be harmonized between those trade blocs or countries, why not? Why not do what the European Union is doing so successfully? Just briefly, a couple of examples of the difference between European and North American regulations. Windstar, our minivan, is one of the top 10 vehicles in the United States. To make that saleable in Europe requires 100 unique parts, required $40 to $50 million of discrete investment, and required independent testing of 33 vehicle systems. Another little example, safety glass standards are different between the European Union and the United States. Safety glass has to break in pieces no bigger than 1 gram in Europe. In the United States, they can break into pieces of 4¼ grams. We can't find any difference whatsoever in safety implications of those two standards. I don't think customers in North America and Europe are much different. Regulation is a standard that's acceptable in one market, can be and should be acceptable in another. They're making it happen in Europe. Why not extend the principle among the trade blocs? The United States is, on the face of it, a single market. But what's going to happen? How efficient will we be if the 50 states start writing their own rules? California has the mandate to sell electric vehicles. Massachusetts and New York followed with similar mandates. We have a major program on electric vehicles, we think the best in the industry. But despite occasional claims of battery breakthroughs by people outside our industry, the present driving range for an electric vehicle is around 100 miles on a warm day. No battery breakthroughs in sight, but the mandate lives on. The United States imposes the most stringent fuel economy standards of any country. After 20 years of fuel standards, our oil consumption remains high. The standards have compromised our ability to give customers the kind of features that they would actually prefer. Our fuel improvements have been driven primarily by competition. As a matter of fact, U.S. car fuel economy has improved by roughly 100% since the 1970s. But today's gasoline prices are so low that the incentives simply don't exist for consumers to choose smaller cars as they do in other countries. CAFE has regulated fuel economy. It has not affected behavior. It is a concept that has failed. We have a great deal of research going on between us in the industry and between the national labs and the industry. A big cooperative effort on the Partnership for a New Generation of Vehicles, PNGV, to improve fuel economy, reduce emissions, lightweight materials, all sorts of different combustion methods, fuel cells, you name it, huge effort underway. None of us disputes the goals of cleaner air, less dependence on foreign oil, but let's do it together, cooperatively, with technology that works and is affordable. But outmoded and contradictory regulations continue with lives of their own. National governments can play a major role in giving direction to this increasingly borderless world, but they can do so only if they work together to create a climate that advances the common interests of everyone. I think the European Union and the United States have an opportunity here to create such a climate. Secretary Ron Brown and Commissioners Leon Britton and Martin Bangemann of the European Union have begun to involve business in such key transatlantic issues as trade, investment, and regulatory policy. And a conference among business and government leaders will be held in Spain in November to formalize the recommendations of some working groups. Personally, I'm encouraged by that development, and we're going to do all we can in Ford to help that kind of exchange across the Atlantic and across the other oceans in the world. So just to sum up, what is this tougher world going to look like? There are some clear indicators, they're clear to me anyway. First, new competitors are emerging, particularly in manufacturing. Second, many of the old mechanisms for generating and distributing wealth will continue to be dismantled. Third, a fierce global battle is already underway for investment that creates wealth and jobs. It will continue to intensify between nations. And fourth, interdependence among major national economies is going to deepen. The ability to sustain an island mentality will become less and less viable as the years go by. In short, it's going to be a global dogfight. Who wins? For companies, those companies that sustain competitiveness. For countries, those that maintain the climate that attracts capital. The two things are inseparable. In the US, there's been a lot of hand-wringing recently about declining standards of living, the education system, the environment, a variety of social problems. But the ability of any country to address these kind of issues will depend on its prosperity and its ability to compete in the world. What sort of climate is the right climate for capital? One that encourages new investment and job creation. One that offers a world-class education system that produces educated, motivated citizens. Third, sound tax, monetary, and fiscal policies. And just as important, I believe, a collaborative approach by government and industry towards regulation. In the West, we've grown accustomed to a pretty comfortable way of life. As new competition confronts us, our choices come down to two. We can run, we can turn ourselves into a fortress, stay where we are, hide from the future. It's a false choice, really, because it leads to a slow slide down the economic ladder. Witness Germany. Till recent times, they thought it had it made, the best place to invest your money. Now they're having to fight like mad to avoid investment flying out of Deutschmarks. The only choice is to prepare to compete in a tougher world. Preparing for it is going to require vigorous change, both by the industries that generate the wealth and for the governments that set the climate. Recently, Lou Gerstner of IBM wrote about education in USA Today, a week or so ago. To describe the kind of changes education will need, he pointed out that the early space program was successful because we set a goal that was beyond, not within our grasp. In tomorrow's world, beyond our grasp will be the requirement to compete with emerging competitor nations. How we respond depends on how firmly we believe in ourselves, in our talents, our creativity, our courage, our resolve to win. Down deep, I think we all know there is really only one choice. It is tough, but it is the only choice. Over the long term, full participation in world-class competition will be the only way to sustain the economic viability of global enterprises. It will be the only way to sustain the economic viability of the countries in which they do business. I thank you for your attention. I'd be glad to take questions.
Thank you very much, sir. We have a number of questions that deal with your remarks on becoming number one. I guess they boil down to, would you explain what you mean? Apparently the Detroit News today carries a report in which you deny saying you want to beat General Motors. Others have said that you do want to beat General Motors. Others have said, Mr. Poling here is quoted as saying, well, maybe you shouldn't want to beat General Motors. And lastly, somebody says, which is the summary question, what do you mean by becoming number one?
Very, very clear. And the Detroit News got it right this morning, I'm very glad to say. I've been widely misquoted on this. Doesn't much matter, frankly. But by number one, we mean top in customer satisfaction, top in quality, top in productivity, top in return to shareholders. Very simple. Does that mean being the number one in number of units sold at any point in time? It might, but it's not the objective. It might be the outcome, but it isn't the objective. I think the genesis of the misunderstanding is that I was asked in a management meeting, what is our capability in market share terms in North America and Europe with our existing production capacity? And I answered that without building a greenfield site, we could achieve 30% of the United States market and about 15% of Europe, compared to 26 and change and 12% and change today. That's been translated by some into a commitment to beat General Motors in terms of volume. It is not. Our primary drive is to satisfy our customers. The customers will decide our market share, as they have in North America. We've gained 7 points of total market share over the last 12 years or so in the United States. Not because we set out to do that, but because we set out to satisfy our customers better than the other guy.
You mentioned the electric car and the limitations of the technology to date. A number of questions say, what do you see as the future of the electric car? And as a corollary, is it true that the big three plan to go ahead with their 49-state clean car, even though the Northeast states have not agreed to kill mandates for electric vehicles?
Well, on the first part of the question, I think the future of electric vehicles depends on battery breakthroughs, breakthroughs that will allow greater range, greater energy storage by batteries, and much lower cost, so that the equation for the customer will work. There is no sign of such a breakthrough, but people who say we're not interested in keeping abreast of developments must think we are really, truly nuts. Because if someone comes up with a breakthrough, we are in the transportation business. We have to be right up in the front, because that would be an enormous event for us if and when there's a breakthrough in battery technology. We don't see any such breakthrough today. But we do have extensive fleets running in Europe and North America of electric vehicles. Ford was a pioneer in the development of new batteries decades ago. But the future is murky. Until we crack the cost and feasibility in terms of range and storage capacity, I think the future is not bright for electric vehicles, but we're continuing to work on the whole subject. How will we come out with our mandate discussions with the northeastern states? We're still in the middle of discussions, so I wouldn't like to pre-guess, to guess ahead of time as to how that's going to come out. What we'd really like to do is get the 49-state vehicle agreed and have the mandate pushed by California, the electric vehicle mandate pushed ahead by California and the northeastern states. But I wouldn't like to guess on the precise outcome.
Surveys show that consumers no longer regard the automobile as the status symbol it once was, and are less willing to put the purchase of a new car, especially at the prices today, to put the purchase of a new car ahead of other purchases. What does that bode for the auto industry?
Well, we don't think that's accurate. There may be some, like most statements, there's some truth to almost anything that one says, and there's maybe a little grain of truth there, but I go with how the industry sales have been going. It's hard to square that statement with 15.4 million vehicles last year. This year, we're confident that we'll come in light of August sales numbers, that will come in at about 15, maybe a little north of 15. Next year, we're convinced the number will be higher than 1995. So people may be saying that, they may be thinking that, but they're still buying the same percent of GDP is being spent on automobiles in 1995 as was spent in 1955, 1965, 1975, and 1985. It's virtual constant, the percent of GDP spent on automobiles. So, yeah, it's nice to theorize about that. People may even say it. I don't care about my new vehicle anymore. Well, why are they buying 15 million of them?
Would you please discuss the outlook for Ford's third and fourth quarter earnings, and also please comment on the undervaluation of Ford stock?
Well, thank you for saying it was undervalued. Whoever asked the question said it was undervalued. No, I won't comment on the earnings outlook because I want to get back home later on this evening. But as some of you may have heard, I have said, I say it today, that our stock is undervalued in our opinion. We're a very strong company with a very strong balance sheet, very strong sales momentum, not only in the United States but worldwide for a number of years. We're growing in strength all the time. We have a very, very successful financial services group, and 6 times earnings, in my opinion, is an undervaluation. It's a free country. Everyone's entitled to an opinion.
You have said you would like to cut $3,000 out of car costs. Does this mean Ford is going to cut back on incentives to purchase or lease a car?
Well, no, we didn't mean those kind of costs. We meant the labor, material, overhead, all of the costs inside the manufacturing infrastructure of the company. We weren't referring to the external costs as I would term the incentives and so forth. No, this is hard cost that we're shooting for. It's a very ambitious target. It's a partnership target with our key suppliers. It has to be a partnership, otherwise it won't work. It requires very, very stringent efficiency objectives inside Ford Motor Company and inside our major suppliers. Year by year, for the next 5 years, we have set ourselves and our suppliers very, very tough objectives to drive the basic cost of the vehicle down. We think it's going to be imperative we do that to be a successful competitor in the world that's coming at us. As we see it, it's going to be much, much tougher than it is today. Today is a stroll through the park compared to what it's going to be like in the next 5 or 10 years.
All right, if you want to cut costs by cutting the cost of labor, how does this downsizing affect the people who have lost their jobs and the morale of those who still have their jobs and their work ethics?
Well, we haven't been downsizing, we've been upsizing. And if we continue to be as successful in the next decade as we have in the last decade or two, we will reinvest growth, will be efficient, which drives jobs out, but we will grow, which drives jobs in. And if we can, our ambition is to have the two balanced, not to reduce the size of our company, but to achieve stability through growth. But if we don't grow, then of course the implications are negative, that we will be taking people out, but that is not our goal. Our goal is to continue to grow new markets, and within our long-established markets like the United States and Western Europe and Germany and Britain, France and Spain, for example, our ambition is to grow and use our productivity to grow, not to diminish the size of the company.
What are you going to do with all of those Tauruses that were leased 2 years ago and are now coming back to you? Won't this glut of used cars undercut new car sales? Are you going to restructure your leasing program to prevent problems such as this again?
We don't think we need to restructure. We're very happy with the way things are happening. If there are some dealers here today, I think you should ask them how they feel about the 2-year-old used Tauruses coming back. They're hot stuff. They're very sought-after vehicles. They sell just like that. We see no evidence they're impacting new vehicle sales. New vehicle sales, to put it in perspective, are approximately 15 million vehicles this year. Used vehicle trades, no one knows the exact data, but there'd be at least 30 million, maybe 40. So the Tauruses coming back are just a drop in a very large bucket. And we see no evidence whatsoever they're impacting new vehicle sales.
Ford is involved in a number of cost-shared technology projects with the federal government, including ones associated with the Advanced Technology Project and the Partnership for a New Generation of Vehicles. How do you defend these collaborations against charges that what they really represent is corporate welfare by the government? And how hard will Ford fight to keep them?
Well, I really don't think of Ford as being on welfare. I think the collaboration between the government and industry in this country is extremely healthy and long overdue. I've worked in a number of places in the world, and America, I think, came close to the bottom of the list in collaboration or anything like it between the wealth-creating industry in the country and the government. And I'm not talking about pork barreling or charity or anything like that, but working cooperatively in the national interest, I think, makes sense. So again, it's just my point of view. But I don't see that the collaboration on the Partnership for Next Generation Vehicle, for example, is any kind of charity. I think it's very much in the national interest, for wealth creation, for job creation, for competitiveness of the United States. I think it's very healthy, and I hope it continues.
What is the timetable for introducing new U.S.-built Fords with right-hand drive to the Japanese market, and where will they be made?
Well, we have right-hand drive vehicles in the Japanese market today from Ford in Europe and from Ford in Michigan, already selling, the Probe and the Mondeo. I'm going to, at the Tokyo show in October, to launch the right-hand drive Taurus, the brand new vehicle. Will be right-hand drive, very competitively priced, right in the heart of that segment in Japan, starting in October. And we have 2 more high-volume right-hand drive vehicles coming in the subsequent 12, 24 months. So we'll have 5 right-hand drive vehicles in there.
Talking about your visits to China, a couple of questions. Can U.S. trade negotiators successfully end piracy of intellectual property rights in China? How should the U.S. business proceed in that market? And in your talks with the Chinese, did you question their use of prison and child labor to make goods?
Now, on the first one, on the piracy thing, there has been an agreement reached between the United States and China on the issue of piracy. We'll have to see as the years roll by. I think that issue is under control. Personally, I think it's under control and will cease to be an issue between the countries. And no, I did not raise the subject of child labor or slave labor with the Chinese. It was not part of my discussion. We do business in 200 countries, as I mentioned. Practices in many countries are not what we have in the United States. We have had to learn as a large multinational to live with the differences in cultures. As a businessman, I think that's an appropriate position to take.
What should the Clinton administration do to open up the South Korean auto market?
Well, I think a dialogue should be established very urgently with South Korea on automotive trade, or lack of it, between South Korea and the United States certainly, but other countries also. And I think it starts with a dialogue, and I'm going to lobby that dialogue should begin urgently and seriously to open that market.
Can you elaborate on Ford's Hanoi plant? How big, how many cars will be built, and what would be the impact on Detroit production?
I doubt that it would have any impact. If it did, it would be small on Detroit production. The size of the plant hasn't been exactly determined yet. It would be in a developed market sense, it would be small. It's most likely to be 25 to 50,000 vehicles a year in production capacity. That general size of plant, although it isn't exactly determined yet. It would be primarily to fund, to provide the growth in automotive sales in that part of the world.
And before we leave Asia, questioner says that the enforcement measures announced by Mickey Cantor don't really involve the Japanese government at all, despite the ballyhoo they've been getting from the administration. Do you believe that these trade talks have really resulted in anything that can be effective?
Yes, I do. But as some people point out, we have thought that before. We'll have to monitor very carefully, which was part of the discussion this morning, very specifically, that there will be collaboration between the United States government and the U.S. auto industry in the monitoring of what actually happens over the next few months and years in the Japanese market in terms of part sales, number of dealers, deregulation of the service business there, and a number of other issues. So there'll be very close monitoring, and if progress isn't observed, then we'll deal with that if and when that happens. I hope that we will make progress. Our most urgent priority in Ford is to establish a number of high-volume Japanese dealers, Toyota and Nissan dealers in Japan. We only have the one Toyota dealer, and I think it's either 4 or 5 Nissan dealers in Japan, and we need several hundred. And we've been pushing on that subject now for quite a long time in Japan, very vigorously, with a first-class team of people, and we've made no progress, well, none, almost none, on that subject. We want to see very clear indication that that's going to change over the next few months. And one of the measuring points is going to be October, which is coming up soon. When I go over there, I want to see how many dealers we've signed up between the date of the agreement and the date of the auto show in October.
All right, back at home, when will Ford begin to install a route guidance and head-up display in its domestic auto models, and where?
I'm not sure, to be perfectly honest. I think within a year or two. It's not a long a long way away. I think within a year or two, and most likely it'll be on the town car or the Lincoln Continental. That would be my guess.
In the year 2000, in your opinion, what portion of the U.S. auto market will be fueled by something other than gasoline?
Considerably less than 1%.
Explain, please.
I think gasoline is the fuel. Nobody has figured out with electricity or any other way to. Gasoline is very dense in its energy storage capability. It's cheap. It's almost free in this country compared with other countries. Hence the absurdity of CAFE, really, trying to incentivize people to buy little cars when they really want bigger cars, or vehicles with more people room, more luggage room. And with gasoline at $1.15, there is no incentive for them to take a car other than the one that they would really like. There are other alternatives. We've mentioned electricity. I don't think that's going to be significant volume. Natural gas, there'll be some applications for natural gas vehicles. We have those in our product offering. There's some methanol and ethanol. I don't think alcohol is going to be a big volume fuel in this country, for automobiles anyway. So I think gasoline is the whole show, or if not all of it. The vast piece of the show in this country in the year 2000 will be gasoline.
For the first time in 40 years, we have a Republican Congress. What would you like to see this Congress deliver? What's most important to you? A capital gains tax relief, regulatory relief? What is your legislative priority?
Well, as a business person, as the head of Ford, I will give the answer rather than personally.
Well, that's what I meant.
Right.
Sorry.
Okay. We would like to see the deficit reduced to zero. I think we should, as a country, stop spending more than we make. We can't do that in our business, and we don't think America can do it in its business forever. So that's a very, very high priority, is to reduce the deficit and get it down. We'd like to see tort reform. We'd like to see tax changes that would encourage investment in wealth creation and job creation. Tax changes that encourage the investment in capital equipment and in competitive investment. Those kind of things. There are a million details to wrestle with as you go through those kind of things, but it's the climate again. It's not the weather. It's give us the climate to encourage business to invest, to grow, and to compete. Tort reform is a big piece of that. We'd like to see significant tort reform to get a lot of that stuff out of the way. And then we would like to see collaborative approach to regulation so that we don't have rules tossed over the wall one at a time, apparently randomly, with very little cooperation between the people doing the tossing. Rules, many of which we believe have had little or no value to society, have reduced the competitiveness of some of the industries in America. So we'd like to have a much more collaborative approach between government and business towards addressing the problems of the nation. I think we're pretty well agreed on the problems. We'd like to see collaboration in approaching those problems.
In your remarks, you suggested a doubling in the value of electronics in the average car. In what areas do you think this will occur, and will Ford follow General Motors in making daytime running lights a standard equipment on their automobiles?
Well, on the second one first, I don't know if we're going to follow or not. It's an intriguing question which we're grappling with right now as to whether we should follow. Everybody doesn't like the on all the time running lights, but we haven't made up our mind is the short answer to that, whether we'll follow or not General Motors' specification of those lights as standard equipment. On the electronic front, as we strive for cleaner and cleaner vehicles, we've taken over 90% of the tailpipe dirt out in the last 20-odd years. And as we go down, we're right at the margin now, getting those little remaining pieces of pollution out of the vehicles requires more and more sophisticated control of what goes on in the engine compartment, what goes on with the gear shift changes, what goes on in the vehicle. So more and more control of how the vehicle runs. Then we're getting into sophisticated braking system, more and more sophisticated braking. We're getting into variable steering, all sorts of things, all sorts of interior, electronics-related interior comfort and safety items, radar, collision avoidance, side impact detectors. I could bore you with the list, but it's a very long list. How much of all of that will find its way in, we're not exactly sure right now, but it's pretty clear that there's an inexorable increase in the content of electronics in our vehicles.
Thank you. Before we get to the final question, I have a couple of gifts for you. First, a certificate of appreciation for being with us today.
Thank you.
And secondly, our famous National Press Club coffee mug.
Well, thank you.
To keep you awake in your drive to be #1.
Thank you.
And finally, the last question from 11-year-old Alex Trotman. He wants to be an auto company chief executive officer when he grows up. He's a guest here at the luncheon. What advice do you have for him on how to make it?
Well, where is Alex? Is he in here?
Right here, right
Where?
here, to your left.
Hi, Alex. Well, you made the first decision. The first important thing you did was decide what you want to do. And you'd be surprised how many people in this room really don't know what they want to do. So that's first. It's terrific. Now you have to decide how hard are you going to be prepared to work to achieve what you want to do. You're going to have to work very hard, study very hard, learn from all experiences. Some of them will be good, some of them won't be good. But you can learn from everything that happens to you, and you should have that mindset. I'm going to learn today. Whatever happens today is a learning experience. Don't be deterred by failure and disappointment. Don't let anything stop you. Have a durability mindset. Because the thing that's most important in getting to be the chairman of Ford or any of the other big jobs like that is durability. Just refusing to give up when tough things get in the way. Is that enough advice? Good luck.
Thank you very much. I want to thank you all for being with us, and I want to note that several people behind the scenes contributed to today's affair. Melissa Bender and Melanie Abdo, Dermot, and Howard Rothman. Thank you for being with us, and good afternoon. Thank you, ma'am, for being with us.
Enjoyed it very much. Thanks for coming and joining us.
Very pleasant.
Sure, much
See what we have to do here.
You have to work very hard. You realize how